Hi, everybody. Hello. Great to see everybody here. Thanks so much for joining. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the E2 visa. Big surprise, right? E2 visa Q&A. And we are really excited to have all of you join us today, and I can't wait to answer all of your questions. There are a bunch of videos on our YouTube channel that have to do with specific countries that are very common applicants. Also, specific industries that I get questions about a lot. And I make videos about these specific industries, different tips and kind of tricks along the way to have better odds of approval for the E2 visa within those industries. So with that, let us get to our first question. Can a transaction from Canada's personal checking to USA business owners' business checking account suffice as at risk? So let's talk a little bit about the at-risk requirement for the E2 visa, okay? So at-risk means essentially it's gone. It's not in a bank account. It's gone, okay? It's spent. It's done. You can't get it back. That means it's at risk, right? So one of the key pieces to the E2 visa application are the receipts for things that you've purchased in the United States in order to get this business going, and the bank statements, the business bank account showing this is how I paid this receipt. Here's a receipt for $2,000 for an office lease. Here's the bank statement showing I've paid that $2,000. Here is a receipt for $5,000 for 4 computers that I bought at Best Buy. Here's the bank account showing that I've paid for that $5,000 already. That is what it means for the money to be at risk. It needs to be spent. Okay. Let's see. Here we go. Living in Canada, can borrowed funds be used for the business? Yeah, they can be. You can use any funds that come from legal sources, right? So we have people who have some loans, but note that any loan that you get must be personal in nature or must be based on personal collateral. So we've had tons of people that said, I've had my family members are willing to give me money, and either as a gift or as some sort of loan in order to buy this business. That's doable, right? We've also had people get loans based on their personal real estate, either in their home country or in the United States. I got a line of credit on my home in Canada or in France, or I actually own a condo in Florida and I got a line of credit on that. That's fine. We've also had personal loans, right? Something like SoFi or something I applied online, and based on the amount of income that I currently have, I was able to get a loan, that type of thing. But just note that the loan can't be backed by the E2 visa business. Okay, so that's a key when talking about that. Does an E2 business need full or part-time employees to qualify? Well, there's no indication of that in the regulation. So we always recommend that you have at least one part-time U.S. citizen or green card holder as an employee at the time of application. And at the time of renewal, or rather after 5 years, we recommend that you have at least 5 employees. Or more, depending on the type of business, right? So if you run a restaurant or something like that, you'll probably need a lot more. If you run a very small office, maybe 5 is sufficient. Maybe 1 or 2 could be part-time and the rest full-time. Those are just guidelines. Geez, everybody's got so many questions today. It's great. Let's see. Purchase a van and business plan and pay immigration fees and website, social media. Can open at E2 at $30K? No, you can't. Don't do it. Not worth it. We always recommend at least $100,000 invested US. Remember that this is called the E2 investment visa. The investment is the main part, right? So the spirit behind the E2 visa is that you invest funds into the United States in order to generate, or in order to operate a business and to hire US citizens and green card holders. Those are the 2 biggest parts of this visa. So do not skimp on the amount of investment, okay? We always recommend at least $100,000 US into the business. Of course, that's going to vary a lot depending on the business and the type of business, the type of industry, things like that. But that at a minimum. How much longer I need to wait for the interview? Well, it really depends on where you applied, right? So all the countries have different wait times. So you would need to speak with the attorney who helped you submit those documents about what the average wait time is for wherever it is that you apply. Can the funds for a business purchase be put in escrow? Yes, they can. That has to be the only contingency. And we usually recommend that outside of escrow, you've invested at least $100,000, right? So if there's a business that's for sale for $500,000, let's say, we usually recommend that at least as an earnest money or something, you've invested $100,000. That's gone no matter what. No matter what happens, gone. The rest could be in escrow pending the E2 visa, approval, right? So that's a possibility, but make sure that you have the right language in that. Can I use a lease agreement to show that the money is at risk? No, you cannot, unfortunately. So if you, let's say that you have an office, lease that's $1,000 a month, right? Something like that. And you sign a 1-year contract for that lease. You can use, and third part, you've paid for 3 months up front. Now, E2 visa quiz. Is the investment $3,000 or $12,000, right? Because you have a contract for $12,000 that you owe them, but you've paid $3,000. And the answer is $3,000. So any contracts that you have for an office lease or otherwise, they're only going to count the investment that you have already paid. They do not count contractual obligations as part of the investment funds. Okay? Will the E2 attorney's fee be part of the investment amount? Generally, we include it if needed. However, sometimes USCIS kicks back on that. So keep it. Will the E2 attorney's fee be part of the investment amount? Generally, we include it if needed. However, sometimes USCIS kicks back on that. So keep that in mind. Other consulates seem to have no issue with it. So we will submit it. But ultimately, it's always up to the consular officer, right? Can you explain the difference between E1 and E2? And would you have a lie on the E1? Yeah. Well, the E1 and the E2 are very different, right? They are basically I will sum it up in this way, right? So the E2 visa is about a future business in the United States that you're going to run. You've set it up and it's ready to run in the United States. The E1 visa is based on a business that you have usually in your home country that trades a lot with the US, and they're looking at previous trade. So for the E1 visa, you have to have at least 12 months of receipts showing that you already have ongoing trade going with the United States, right? There are a lot of different kind of things that we would talk about there. But yeah, that's a great question. Maybe we should do an E1. Maybe we'll do that. Make our next one an E1 Q&A, because again, the E1 is about prior ongoing trade with the United States that is going to continue and actually get bigger. The E2 is about a future business that you're going to be running from the United States. So that is a little bit different. Can you change your business model after you obtain the E2? Oof. This is a tricky one. So the answer is, you can do whatever you want, but a lot of times you will need to ask the consulate or USCIS for permission for that. Right? So what they ask is if you have a substantive change, a substantial change in the business, they want to know about it and they want to approve it. So if you already have, let's say you already have some sort of business that you're operating in the United States, and now you think, well, this isn't really working, or I don't really like it, or I want to do something else, before you do anything, talk to the person who helped you get your E2 visa in the first place and ask, how are we going to do this? And what are we going to do? And how is it different? And all of that. That attorney can advise you regarding how you're going to move forward with that. Okay. Let's see. Would love the E1. Yeah, great. Okay, Josh, how long does it take from start till finish if we get the E2 visa? Because sometimes okay. So yeah, so Josh, the answer is it depends. Right? So let's just walk through all of the steps or stages to the E2 visa and timelines for each, okay? So for the E2 visa, there are 3 stages, All right. Stage number one is the document gathering. So in that instance, we will walk you through all of the documents that you're going to need. That's the very first call we have as attorney and client. We send you a list. We talk about everything that you're going to need so you understand the entire roadmap of the E2 visa document gathering. Then what we do is we take a little bit of a step back and we say, okay, that's a lot of information, right? But we just want you to see all the way. But what we need right now is information regarding your ownership and source of funds. And then, obviously everybody's going to have a slightly different ownership and source of funds situation. So we will let you know exactly the documents we need. You're going to upload those to Dropbox. Then we have another call for step number 2 and another call for requirement number 3 and another call for 4 and 5 and 6. Okay. So we will get through that entire document gathering process together. We will walk you through the whole thing and let you know exactly what we need. All right. That's stage number 1. And here's the great news. That depends entirely upon you as far as timeline. So we are able to move as quickly or as slowly as you want to move, and we will follow your lead on that. It takes the average investor about 3 to 4 months to get through that stage, okay? Some people move much faster than that. Some people take much more time than that. I think our fastest moved through it in about 6 or 7 weeks, and the slowest we ever had took 3 years. But we stuck by them the whole time, no matter how long it takes. Again, the average time for that stage 1 document gathering is going to be about 3 or 4 months. We'll move at your pace, okay? Stage number 2 is the application, right? And that's the timeline is on us. So we take all of those documents we've already reviewed, we put them together in the way that the specific consulate or USCIS, depending on where you're applying, the way that they want to see, cover letters, all of the evidence, we do the whole thing, we put it all together for you, okay? And then we will send it off to the consulate or to USCIS. If we send it to USCIS and you premium process it, we're going to get an answer back in about 2 to 3 weeks regarding the status, okay? If we send it to a consulate, it will vary widely on how long it takes. There are some countries that are moving very quickly. There are some countries that are still taking a super long time. So that will depend on where it is that you go for your interview. But once we know your interview date, so that timeline, I guess, is on the government, on the US government, right? You don't have any control. We don't have any control. But once we know your interview date, we will do an interview prep call with you, let you know where to go, what documents to bring with you, the questions they likely ask, things like that. We do have a video about that as well with former consular officer Anna Kerner Anderson. So be sure to check out that video that talks a little bit more about the interview. So yeah, that's the process. So if you start today on this process, I will tell you the average person is going to get through it in about 5 to 7 months. Okay. So that kind of gives you an outline. That's the average. We've had people move faster than that. And like I said, we've had people take years. So a lot of that will depend upon you, but that's the average. So hopefully that helps. Oh my goodness. Let's see. Will a mailbox and shipping business qualify for an E2 and have a high chance of approval? Well, it could qualify. We've had one. We've done one before. So for sure, that was approved. I actually just got an email from him yesterday. So Scott, if you're watching, hi. So yes, we've had one approved rather recently in the last few months. Those can. High chance of approval. That depends on your documentation, right? So it's not really, the business itself is not something that's approvable or not approvable. It's the documentation that you have. Do you meet the requirements of the E2 visa? And I will tell you that almost any business that's legal could meet the requirements. It's all a matter of, does your attorney help you specifically with the documentation and put together the best application that you possibly can, right? So that's what makes it approvable, is the documentation and the interview. So don't sleep on the interview. Here's something I would like to mention. So there are really 2 parts to this approval process, right? One is the documentation, putting things together in a very streamlined, straightforward manner, getting all of the documents that seem relevant, right? And that's really where your attorney comes in, trying to do the best that they can. But ultimately, the decision is up to the consular officer, right? That's the person who decides whether you get it or not the attorney. And that person will make their decision on the documents and on the interview. So even if all the documents are great, and something goes awry at the interview, or something comes up that maybe your attorney was unaware of, or something like that, that could take a turn. So just keep that in mind, that there are 2 parts to the approval process: documentation plus the interview. But our goal as attorneys is always to make the documentation as clean as possible. So hopefully there are fewer questions at the interview, right? The interview goes faster. That's always our goal. But ultimately, anything could happen at these interviews, right? I mean, the consular officer is the person in charge, but we do our best to put forward the cleanest and cleanest and clearest evidence that we possibly can. Hopefully that you meet the requirements. Let's see. Can two unrelated people from the same country of citizenship apply for E2's 50/50 owners? Yeah. Yes, you can. You both have to meet the requirements, right? You both have to invest substantial amounts into the business. You both have to show how you're going to be directing and developing a business. But yeah, you can. Note, anytime, and we do have a video actually about 50/50 partners, so check that out too. That will give you a lot more detail about that. But keep in mind that if you've got two people who want to invest, you need to invest about the same amount and you can't get it from each other, right? So sometimes I get people calling, well, I want my adult daughter, she's 26, I want her to get this visa with me. And I say, okay, great. Where's she getting the money? Oh, I'm giving it to her. No. Both applicants need to have their own substantial investment from totally separate funds. Okay, so keep that in mind. Like, oh, the daughter inherited something from the grandma, and the mom is personal savings from her work in her home country. Okay, fine. That's awesome. You can do that. But mom giving the money to daughter, or vice versa. Sometimes I've had that too. I've had, hey, my kids are really small and we want to move to the US, but I need my mom to babysit. I'm like, well, that's not going to really be what it is, right? So both partners have to direct and develop the business, and you have to show how you're going to be running this business together. But so keep that in mind. So in that scenario, it wouldn't really even work. Or they will say, well, my mom really helped me at my business in my home country, and I want her to come down here. And I'm like, all right, well, it sounds like you both have the ability to work in this business, which is great. But you guys having the same source of funds, well, I'm just going to give her the money so then she can invest. That doesn't really work, right? So you got to make sure that those source of funds are separate, and you got to make sure that both people can direct and develop the business, okay? Oh my goodness. Let's see. Is this feasible? I will be joining as a CEO. Is it feasible for the E2 visa nationality direct and develop? Yeah. I mean, yes. So I guess it depends on if you're coming as an employee or you're coming as the investor. Either way, generally a CEO will work. There are a lot of things to keep in mind when you're doing an E2 visa for an employee, an executive employee. One of those is that the executive has executive experience, right? So I've had people like, oh, I'm going to make my son the CEO. Okay, cool. How old's your son? 22. Has he ever worked? Well, he worked for like 6 months at Dairy Queen. That's going to be a problem, right? But if you say, oh yeah, this person has worked for 10 years as the COO of a very similar company, and I want them to come over as the CEO of this company, yeah, you can do that. But in addition to the background of the person as a CEO or a COO, or at least executive level experience, you have to show that their job in the United States will also be executive. So it's like, oh, this business has been running for 2 years and we have one employee and this person's going to be a CEO. It's like, well, is a CEO managing one part-time person? I don't know. That doesn't seem like very much of an executive position, right? So something to keep in mind there. But yeah, I mean, a CEO, generally, as long as you can show either if you're the investor and are going to come here to run the business, which is typical, or if you're going to hire someone from your home country, right? You can say, yes, this person's going to come over to run it. And they have executive experience, and this is an executive role, and here are the different things that they're going to be doing here as an executive, not as like a kind of day-to-day worker, right? Something like that. Oh, let's see. ESTA country. Can one use ESTA to travel to the U.S. while a petition for an E2 has already been submitted? We never recommend that you come to the United States while it's pending. It's not to say that you can't do it, but if something, even a small chance that something goes awry at the border, meaning they turn you around at the airport or whatever, that could just complicate the E2. And the reality is, if it's already pending, you're only a few weeks away. Just hang tight. Wait till you get the E2, then you come over and do what you want. Oh my goodness. Is the expedited process available outside the US or only if the application is submitted within the US? Pretty much only if it's in the US. things were a little bit different during COVID and that type of thing. But essentially, there's no expediting outside of the USCIS process. Okay. So a lot of people, there are a lot of questions, but I kind of keep hearing from the same people, which is fantastic. We'd love to talk to you one-on-one and help you out a little bit more with that. Let's see if I can find anybody else who is a new, oh, great. Now I'm not going to be able to scroll, huh? New person here. Let's talk a little bit about, and I really wish that I could scroll here. Am I doing something wrong? Give me just a second. Sorry. So sorry. As you can see, this is not really my deal. Okay. Well, I guess if anybody has anything that I didn't answer that kind of got covered up because now I can't see what's at the top. Terrible at this computer stuff. But let's talk a little bit about a few other things. What do we want to talk about? Ownership, maybe. The two main business entities in the United States are LLCs and C Corps. That's the average. Now, you may talk to a U.S. accountant who says, oh, you need an S Corp. You should have an S Corp or something. Just keep in mind that those are for residents, right? So sometimes that may be difficult for you to get an S Corp. You may not qualify for an S Corp. C Corp and LLC for immigration purposes are all the same. Totally fine. However, you may want to talk to a corporate attorney to give you more information about advantages of filing in different states or registering the business in different states. From a tax perspective, from a liability perspective, these are kind of the things that really make the difference. But from an immigration perspective, they're both fine, right? That's no problem at all. And also, you will get an EIN number for the business, which think of it as like a tax ID number, but just for the business, not for an individual person, but for the business, right? Because obviously, they're good at getting their tax money, baby. Don't worry about that. They're going to get their money. So they're happy to give every business an EIN number so you can happily pay your taxes for that business. So anybody can get an EIN number for the business, not as an individual person, but for the business. Okay, so keep that. Should the business be up and running before we apply for the E2? Yeah, we generally recommend it. What the requirement there is called real and operating. That's the requirement. And they want to see that it's either operational or on the verge of operations. Sometimes it's very difficult to show that something is on the verge of operations. So normally we recommend that if you have something that is a retail type business, that you have at least 2 days of operations. So we could show the bank account like, oh, here's somebody buying tires. Here's somebody buying spark plugs. If you were doing some kind of business, a retail business for cars or something. If you have something that's more of like a consulting type business or something like a service business, which is recurring, we normally recommend that you have at least 2 contracts for U.S. customers in the U.S. Hey, they're going to be doing X, Y, and Z work. And we're going to be, we're going to get paid this and that whole thing. Now, just be very cautious about anything that indicates unauthorized work. You cannot work in the United States until you have an E2 visa. Cannot. So if you don't have an E2 visa yet and you have these contracts, that means you should likely be outside of the U.S. and you should have U.S. employees handling the work, or the contracts should be for the future. Okay, 3 months from now, we're going to be starting this project, whatever. Okay, so keep that in mind. You want to make sure that that's really, really clear. If the business is actually making money, you should not be in the U.S. and you need to have U.S. employees handling that work until you get your E2. Then you can come into the U.S. and work immediately, right? And that's generally what we recommend. Oh my goodness. Can I buy a house? Yeah, you could buy a house with no visa. You won't have authorization to live here very long, but anybody can buy a house in the United States. If you've got the money, we got the real estate. So you don't need a visa for that. But you will need a visa to live in the United States. So that's something else. Let's see, any tips for the interview? Yeah, we've got several. There's actually a video about that. So you should go watch the video. And we also have an interview with an ex-consular officer that's going to talk a lot about the interviews from the consular officer side, right? Because they're the ones that ultimately make the decision. So I would go check out those videos. Let's see. How Do I require a business with an E2 visa? I believe that the E2 requires majority ownership and creation of employment, both of which likely won't work if you use your E2 visa as buying an entity. Acquire a business. Yeah, people buy businesses all the time. We have clients who are always buying businesses. Tips for buying an existing business. You need an appraisal of that business, right? You need to figure out what is it actually worth in the immigration regulations terms. What is the fair market value of that business? And you need to be paying it, right? So if you have a third party appraiser, note, it needs to be a third party and it needs to be a company that generally does business appraisals in that area, that geographic area that does it. But if they write up the appraisal and go, hey, this business is worth approximately $261,000 and the seller is selling it to you for $120,000, there's going to be a lot of questions. Namely, is this a relative of yours? And that's going to end up being a problem, right? Or alternatively, if it's worth $261,000 by this appraiser and they're selling it to you for $395,000, well, that's just bad all the way around, right? You don't want to be paying more than a business is worth, just from your own business sense, but also from an immigration sense. They're going to be like, why would you buy this business? Like, this doesn't make any sense. You're paying way more for it than it's worth. Why are you doing that? So those will cause questions. But yeah, you can buy an existing business. We have people do it all the time. You can for sure do that. Again, you just have to meet all of the E2 visa requirements, right? So it's really not about, is it a brand new business? Are you purchasing a franchise? Are you purchasing for a geographic area that you're going to start? Are you purchasing a franchise from another franchisee? We've had that too. Are you starting your own business? Are you buying from like a mom and pop, right? That just like these kind of private owners that want to sell this business because they want to retire or what have you. We've had people do all of them. And people get approved for all of those different scenarios. So again, it really just has to do with, do you meet the requirements of the E2 visa, right? So that's that. Let's see. We're running up on it. We've got 3 more minutes. Exciting. So if you have any kind of final questions, please get them in. And I'm going to answer questions for the next 3 minutes. And then we're going to sign out. But of course, you're going to be able to watch this again on the video. Or on the YouTube channel. And then please check out all of the other videos that we have, right? We have so many that actually go into more detail about some of the questions I've asked today or I've answered today. We have videos about like very specific niche topics, so they really go into detail. I'm going to travel to the US next month. Should I incorporate a company and set up a business before getting in touch with an attorney? Here's what we recommend. It's a great question. So, and we have a video for this too, what you should do before you talk to an E2 attorney. But we recommend that you do only 3 things before you talk to an attorney, okay? These 3 things you need to do, and no attorney can help you with it, but I wouldn't do one other thing other than these things before you have an attorney helping you, right? Because you want to do things right from the beginning. So number 1, determine that you want the E2 visa. Nobody can do that for you but you, right? Do you want this visa? Is this the type of visa that you want? And do you want to live and work in the US? These are questions you have to answer. Number 2, determine 1 or 2 businesses that you want to buy or start. Right? So the world is your oyster as far as types of businesses, of course, as long as they're legal and they have a tax designation as for profit. Anything is possible, but you've got to narrow it down because as the immigration attorney, I can't really tell you what you're going to be good at or what you're going to enjoy or anything. But you need to narrow it down to 1 or 2 businesses. And then from there, we can give you some tips about, hey, from an immigration perspective, this one may be easier than that type of thing. But we can't just pick something randomly for you, okay? And then number 3 is figure out when and where you're going to get the funds to invest in this business and make sure that you're going to be able to get your hands on that money within the next 30 days, right? So if you know right now, I definitely want the E2, I know exactly what business I want to start and I'm going to have my money in 6 months, just save up that money and call us 5 months from today. Okay, in 30 days, I'm going to have my money. I know the business I want, and I definitely want that E2 visa. That is when we can help you. So I would not do anything else other than those 3 things. Then give us a call and we're going to walk you through everything else. If you were listening a little bit earlier, one of the first steps is ownership. And that's going to be talking about that LLC or C Corp and the ownership and the breakdown and the documents we need, that type of thing. That's one of the very first things we're going to work on in this application. We're going to give you a very specific information that we need in your case in order to best show that you meet the requirement of ownership, okay? 1 more minute. Let's see. if I go on E2 through business or a franchise, can I apply for an EB5 once a business touches over $1 million in sales and have more than 5 employees? The answer is no. We don't do EB5s, but you will need a personal investment of at least, I think it's 805,000. So that's a personal investment, not reinvestment of revenues. And you're going to need 10 full-time U.S. employees. Other than that, I really don't feel comfortable answering questions about EB5s because we don't do them. They're a much different beast than the E2. And that brings us to 10:30, folks. It was lovely to speak with all of you, and I really, really appreciate all of you joining. Please reach out anytime. I think that in the chat, Tatiana from my office has given her email. Tatiana, maybe you can do that one more time. So feel free to reach out at any time. We have a very short questionnaire that we will send you, just kind of about where you're at in the E2 visa process. And then we're going to talk about next steps and chatting and consultations and all of it. We would love to speak with you. So please reach out. There it is. If we miss any of your questions, Rupert at rupertlawgroup.com. Please reach out anytime. We are excited to talk with you about your E2 visa. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you.